unbelievable. At 6 o'clock, there's still this amount of energy in the room. I'm so excited to be introducing our next two speakers, Feems and Kevin Owocki, two people who have done incredible work in innovating in the grant allocation ecosystem and the on-chain capital allocation ecosystem. This is going to be our closeout, so I'm really excited to bring these two folks to a quick conversation about capital allocation. Let's give them a round of applause.
Hi. Testing. Hi, I'm Feems. I was the developmental editor for this On-Chain Capital Allocation book, but mostly I work in grants and governance as an operator and a researcher. And this, of course, is Kevin Owocki, who can introduce himself.
Hey, I'm Kevin. I started at Gitcoin.
Cool. Drop. So I also want to give credit to, it was a team that actually built this book this time. So I want to just read a few names of the contributors that have participated. So there's Matilda, who is the publication editor, Riley, the copy editor, the writers, including Sarah, Matt, and Trinity, it's myself, and researchers, including Sejal, Izzy, Ornella, and Matt, and designed by Anya. I withhold last names because I didn't really have the permission to read it, so I'd actually like to start with the why. So what inspired you to start collecting information on resource allocations, and why is it important now to have this type of resource?
Yeah. Well, so we wrote this book, the On-Chain Capital Allocation Handbook, Explorer's Edition, in order to illuminate what we see as a really exciting design space. Capital allocation is any time you decide to spend money or resources in order to reach a goal. That could be financial goals like profit, or it could mean impact goals or funding of public goods. And I see an opportunity to completely rewrite the category of how humans spend money as blockchain becomes our financial infrastructure. And so sketching out some of the opportunity space is what we were trying to do with this book. And I also, I noticed that you asked the question about resource allocation, and we've had a debate within the group of writers about, do we call this a capital allocation book or a resource allocation book? Because arguably some of the most important resources that we allocate in intellectual capital attention, by the way, thank you for allocating your attention to me right now, except for the people on their phone in the back. All right. So I just think that as we move to on-chain infrastructure, there's going to be a lot of opportunities to more precisely allocate capital at scale and do it in a more democratic way. And we want to sort of help the people who are building that revolution with this research. So that was the idea behind the book.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of the titling of the conversations that we had around it, so unlike the first book, so this book will actually be categorized in different categories outside of capital allocation. So that would include governance mechanisms, cooperative models, and applied use cases. The reason why we had these conversations about classifying them more effectively is that I think sometimes words matter. And so if we're introducing new concepts or definitions, it allows people to actually have a better context within that. So what you'll find is that not everything will be on-chain capital allocation, but in some way connected. So I actually wanted to talk to you, Kevin, about how do you see this resource and the contents within it in practice? How can it be used in practice is actually the question.
Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of us in this room are participants in DAOs and in on-chain ecosystems. And so a lot of the things that we've listed in the book, from auto PGF to build guild streams to Lotto PGF to social impact bonds to ranked choice voting to cooperative models to base paint are things that we're going to use over the next couple of years as on-chain products get more and more useful. And so I'm really excited about a world in which you don't have to think really intellectually about these things in order to participate in them. Some of the people who have built these mechanisms are in the room right now. I think Nico from Lotto PGF is somewhere around. What's up, Nico? Snaps for Lotto PGF. Josh in the bread chain team. What's up? How you doing? And so the innovators are in this room, and I think that there's an opportunity for us as the on-chain economy grows to actually use these things. And boy, wouldn't it be a beautiful world if in 10 years we could disrupt the inefficient power brokers that are allocating capital in the real world in meat space and use on-chain mechanisms. That's the dream.
Yeah, I mean, like talking about innovations, there's also traditional ones that kind of remind me of models that exist within a DAO. So rotating saving and credit associations, very similar to a DAO. The basic concept is that you have a treasurer that you trust, and every month you would give them a certain amount. And then based on the pool, if it's your month, then you would get that. And so it relies on like a trust system for that. And then like participatory budgeting is also something that we apply, but we don't reference it as well. So I think it's really important to have the traditional models featured here, but ones that are also relevant to the context of Web3 and building. Because sometimes I feel that we are trying to reinvent the wheel a lot. So if we can't look at where we came from, we don't really know where we're going. So I thought that was interesting.
One of the things I think is really cool that's come up in this research is how much the way we do resource allocation has evolved over time as humanity has gone from small tribes of hunter-gatherers to agrarian societies, and then in the industrial age and in the information era, we started to rely on these large national governments and social welfare systems of the nation state. And one of the things that I'm sort of interested in is how much are we going to see a revival of indigenous and local peer-to-peer resource allocation systems that used to exist before we relied on governments, and in what ways could we bring those on chain and start to experiment with things like commitment pooling or workforce rotation. And it's just kind of like a really exciting design space to just cartography it and to compare and contrast these different trust assumptions and collective bargaining agreements that have existed through time. And I'm really excited to play with them and to fuck around and find out with these new mechanisms.
Are there any mechanisms that you think could be used as a tool stack?
Well, I mean, obviously, Gitcoin.
In the book, I mean.
You knew I was going to shill Gitcoin grants, and then you blocked me. I think one of the coolest mechanisms in the book is base paint. So this is a pixel artist rev share mechanism, and basically base paint is kind of it's a canvas that once per day they mint a pixel art canvas, and it's a multiplayer real-time painting of a piece of art, and then after 24 hours the art locks, and then a group of curators can clean up the art, and once it mints, people can mint that piece as an NFT, and everyone who put a pixel on that canvas gets a share of the revenue. So it's like a collaborative, real-time co-creation of an art piece. And we actually did a base paint about the On-Chain Capital Allocation book, which has base paint in the book. So it's just like a fun little loop there. And artists made I think it was like 5 or 6 ETH from the campaign. So new ways of funding art, I think, is the general category that I'm excited about. But base paint is just a really cool mechanism. Shout out to the founders, Zach Herring and I forget the other guy's name, but shout out to the founders of base paint.
So speaking of, well, not so, but you mentioned Gitcoin, grants. So there's been a lot of conversation about sustainability and less reliance on grants. Where do you think that, like, where's the way forward outside of just a funding mechanism relying on grants? Like, what do you see us using or maybe things that we should use or think about in order to create much more sustainability in our funding mechanisms.
Yeah. I think that I can't wait to see what's next, and I think it's hard to know with certainty what's going to be over the horizon. It's kind of like asking the question in the 1990s. In the 1990s, if you would ask someone like what's next after mail, like physical mail, no one would have predicted email and then like Twitter and then like TikTok. It would have like blown your brain in the 90s to think about those things. But like in retrospect, it's completely obvious that that was going to be the lineage of how we changed how we process information. And so I think there's definitely something over the frontier past grants that's going to be more scalable and more precise ways of allocating capital. And so we'll see what those are. In 10 years, maybe we'll look back and it'll look obvious, just like the internet looks obvious to us today. But I'm excited about direct-to-contract incentives. I'm excited about futarchy. I'm excited about impact metrics-based retro funding. We don't have time to go into what each of these are. You got to read the book in order to know what those things are. But there's just some really cool experiments that are going on in the space, and that's one of the joys of writing this book is cartographying all the different things that are available, and hopefully we can cross-pollinate once we are aware of what everyone else is doing.
Cool. So I actually wanted to open it up for any questions since we have about 8 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask?
Questions? Do we have a mic for Q&A?
A quick question about attended your workshop earlier about your vision on for nonprofit, raising money for nonprofit and non-government organizations. How do you envision that? Maybe it's do you see that happen like 5 years down the road, or maybe shorter or longer time frame?
Yeah, great question. So I mean, I think that my sort of vision in a very reductionist way is to fund Ethereum public goods and then fund public goods for all EVM-based communities that have treasuries, and really perfect a set of 6 to 10 mechanisms that we feel really good about the mechanisms that they really work on chain, and then we reach escaped velocity and we can bring them to cities and states and countries and NGOs in order to help them with their resource allocation needs. And ideally, we can allocate resources better at scale with on-chain primitives, and by then we'll have solved all the UX issues with blockchains. But the future is unwritten, and I think it's up to the people in this room to first we have to allocate our own resources in the Web3 space, and only when it works for ourselves can we go to the rest of the world and incredibly make a case that they should adopt these primitives. Good question.
Yeah, a bit related to this. What would be your pitch for the book for completely newcomers? So how would you hook them to on-chain allocation?
I mean, the book doesn't just have on-chain. Like we created a persona specifically for this particular book, and it was people that were interested in the topic. So you could work in Web3, but also those that are working in nonprofit and charity, just organizations that are looking for models outside of what they've seen. There's a lot of them that are not specifically to Web3, and ones that are specifically to Web3. The funding mechanisms within most, I wouldn't say like quadratic accelerator, but within most is really easy for people to understand. And so that was kind of the purpose of this book, is that we wanted to work on something that was a little bit more grounded, and that people could use as a resource at any time.
Yeah, plus one to that. I'll also say that, what would my pitch be to an outsider about this work? First off, I don't go around evangelizing this. This is out there if you need it. But, gun to my head, if you asked me to pitch this to a random person on the street, I would say, the internet completely rewrote how society processes information because now computers could send information across a network. And that changed everything in society that relied on information, social media, newspaper, politics, all that stuff. And now we have the ability to send value across a network. And so the parallel for me is that it's going to completely change how we route value in society, insurance, banking, how we fund art, how we fund collective action. And so get on board with the movement because we're changing how the world allocates capital and creates collective action. So that's what I'm here for. Great. We only have, I think you just gave us 5 minutes. We have 4 minutes now. Let's do one more question, and then let's break for happy hour, which in a way is a resource allocation, liquidity allocation to my belly. Go ahead.
So in your workshop today, you said that you've now done 22 rounds of quadratic funding. And I guess I was just wondering, in all that time, could you speak to the limitations or learnings from that model, and if there's any kind of things we need to improve moving forward?
Oh yeah, lots of things to improve. Quadratic funding is, I think, really good at giving average citizens a voice because you're allocating the matching pool on the basis of the number of contributors more than the amount that they give. But there's a couple really big Achilles heels with quadratic funding. The first is, how do you know if you're being Sybil attacked or not? So how do you know if there's a sock puppet attack or not? Within that also collusion attacks, like things where if I'll give you $1 to contribute to my grant, that's a big limitation of quadratic funding. And another limitation of quadratic funding is that you always have to be topping up the matching pool with more and more funding. And so there's a continual, just always shilling all the time. And so, those are Achilles heels of quadratic funding. And part of the reason that Gitcoin's going multi-mechanism is because we think that quadratic funding is just one form of capital allocation. We also want to mess around with retro funding and community currencies and futurarchy and conviction voting. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity to go multi-mechanism. And I believe that each mechanism is going to be good at one thing. And if we can have sort of like a Swiss Army knife of different mechanisms, that's going to be how we fund public goods in the future. Yeah, Feems, anything to add there?
+1.
Okay, there we go. Well, should we wrap it up then?
Yeah. So thank you for joining us in this discussion. We do have some books, right?
We have, so if you go to the Gitcoin booth, which is exactly catty corner where we are in that room over there, you can pick up a copy of the book. I will be over there signing books, and we also have posters that show how humanities resource allocation has evolved over time, and we're also giving away those posters today. If you don't get a book today, you can go to allobook.gitcoin.co and download a free PDF copy, or you can order a physical copy to anywhere in the world for, I think it's $20 is what we're selling them for, which is just the printing costs. So thanks so much for coming to the book launch, and I'll see you at the resource allocation, happy hour in a second.